lot of people mix styles.
But do it
and either
poorly.
you're like, God, that guy can't rap or the shit, or wow, they're way too metally, or wow, they're way too stiff, or
yeah, it seems
they're
like
way too heavy, or they're way too this. I think each part of music that we do, we like so many different kinds of music. Mm-hmm. We really can play and make the kind of music that we make.
In the business of rock and roll, there are at least 2 roads to stardom that have been travelled over and over, though neither is guaranteed to bring success. Some bands and artists hit it big right from the start, getting picked up by radio and TV purely on the strength of their initial singles and live appearances at high-profile events. The early media whirlwind builds and builds, and eventually lifts them into the stratosphere of pop culture immortality, regardless of whether or not their music contributes anything worth noting to the rest of the world. And then there is the more circuitous route, where a band builds its audience through relentless, incessant touring, carefully constructing a grassroots base of fan support that eventually swells into a tidal wave, finally propelling the band to mainstream fame and riches. Certainly the latter route is the hardest, requiring diligence, hard work, and faith in yourself and your sound, even when the public isn't immediately buying in. And though it may take a while for your band to stumble upon popularity, a sort of blind faith is needed in order to keep plugging away, shilling yourself wherever you can without getting disheartened by the lack of seeming disinterest of the mass music buying audience. The rap rock thrash band Limp Bizkit took the hard road, though it wasn't always their choice. Thanks to a lot of hard work and a little faith, now it's all paying off.
One of the ways that he met Korn is he tattooed him and slipped him our demo.
When the impetus for Limp Bizkit was hatched, Fred Durst was an untrained artist and frustrated music fan living in the sleepy college town of Jacksonville, Florida. Like many artists, Durst made his living in a field not directly related to his favourite type of art, in this case tattooing. As one of Jacksonville's leading tattoo artists, Durst was forced to adorn people's bodies with whatever their hearts desired, which was usually hearts, devils, or names of loved ones. To this day, all 3 of these icons have retained particular significance to Durst and Limp Bizkit, reminding him of his days in the tattoo parlours before fame and fortune swept him away. Durst grew up in Gastonia, North Carolina, where he described himself as an academic whiz. As a white person, he was a minority at his mostly African-American elementary school, and being exposed to this new culture piqued Durst's interest in hip-hop music. He soon began listening to hip-hop pioneers like the Cold Crush Brothers, Grandmaster Caz, and the Treacherous Three. By the time he reached high school, he was a veritable b-boy, dressing in the latest hip-hop fashions, from baggy jeans to shell-toed Adidas without shoelaces, a la Run DMC. While Durst now says he was popular with many of his fellow students, many mates who were unable to reconcile the white kid that was constantly listening to black music ostracised him. After graduating from high school, Durst dreamed of being a rap star or a professional skateboarder. Still, recognising the value of an education, Durst enrolled at the nearby Gaston College and declared himself an art major. However, just 4 days after beginning his pursuit of higher education, Durst dropped out of college. His parents forbade him from returning home, so the broke, down-and-out Durst crashed on his friends' couches while he tried to figure out a plan for his life. At that time as well, Durst's girlfriend of the moment got pregnant, but she moved away before their child was born. His father, a retired chief of undercover narcotics, began pressuring Fred to make something of his life. It seemed as though life could be no worse. After much soul-searching, and in a desperate attempt to make his parents proud, Durst joined the United States Navy, serving the US military at sea. His stint in the Navy lasted all of 18 months, and Durst later described the period to Rolling Stone magazine as soul-destroying. He received a discharge from the Navy after injuring his wrist while skateboarding during his free time, and he returned to North Carolina to seek his fortune. This time Durst settled in the more urban city of Charlotte, away from his parents in Gastonia, and he briefly worked at a skateboarding park. Though this job allowed him to indulge his passion for skateboarding, It left him feeling unfulfilled, not allowing him to unleash his creative juices. Also, at this time, Fred's parents were both retiring, so the entire Durst family picked up and moved down to Jacksonville. At 21 years old, the age when many of his peers were graduating from college and going through the corporate recruiting process, snagging their first high-paying jobs, Durst was cutting grass and trimming hedges, working for a landscaping company his father had started. Soon after, Durst got into tattooing. Although he didn't exactly love working as a tattoo artist, it allowed him to make an honest living, as well as letting him flex his artistic abilities, creating permanent, if ill-advised, testaments to his talents. He also spent plenty of time having himself decorated, and his body now displays more ink than skin. In addition, tattooing enabled Durst to make many connections within Jacksonville's underground scene of musicians and other artists who came to him for their body art. By late 1994, Durst was wearying of the grind of tattooing, and he began using his profits from his work to support his music habit. He wanted to create a band that sounded nothing like any music he had ever heard before. Drawing from his hip-hop upbringing, Fred had dreams of establishing a group that could seamlessly blend the percussive, alliterative lyricism of rap music with the wall of sound guitar noise that some of his other favourite bands, such as Korn, featured. During his free time, away from the buzzing and paint of the tattoo needle, Durst noodled around with a few of his friends in a band they called Limp Bizkit, taking their name from one of their burned-out friends who'd smoked too much pot and whose brain they described as a limp biscuit. They altered the spelling a bit, much like Led Zeppelin did to the German airship years earlier when choosing their name. Durst studied local bands that were established in the Jacksonville music scene as he desperately tried to find musicians that shared his love for the disparate fields of hip-hop and punk rock. He reeled in his longtime friend Sam Rivers to play bass, and Rivers called in his cousin, jazz drummer John Otto, to man the skins. After adding guitarist Wes Borland, Limp Bizkit began playing a few shows regionally, showcasing their raw mixture of attacking, hard-hitting, rocking guitar and bass rhythms with sing-song rap lyrics from Durst layered over the top. Though their early shows were anything but well-planned, fans began showing interest. Limp Bizkit received a fortuitous break in 1995 when the band Korn came through Jacksonville on one of their initial tours. Following the show, Korn bassist Fieldy and guitarist Head hooked up with Durst, and they both went back with him to get a few tattoos. Durst supplied Head with a Korn tattoo across his back. A few months later, Korn returned to Jacksonville, and Durst presented Fieldy and Head with a copy of Limp Bizkit's demo tape. After listening to it, the duo was impressed, so much so that they promised to pass the tape along to renowned producer Ross Robinson, who had previously produced Korn and Sepultura. By this time, Limp Bizkit was playing regularly in and around Jacksonville, and they had generated quite a buzz for themselves amongst fans who connected with their sound of loosely controlled rage and tightly wound beats. Meanwhile, the demo tape actually got handed off to Robinson, and he too fell in love with the band. Thanks to their yeoman work ethic and a touch of good luck, an incredible record industry buzz began building around the band.
We've been blessed to do nothing but amazing tours since day one.
The favourable industry inside word landed Limp Bizkit a gig opening for the then popular rap group House of Pain, the Irish-American rappers who had recently released their timeless hip-hop classic, Jump Around. The national tour served to create an even larger and more fervent fan base for Limp Bizkit, exposing the group to an audience of rap fans that appreciated Durst's lyrical skills. Also, while on the tour, Durst and the band befriended House of Pain's man on the wheels of steel, DJ Lethal, born Leo Dumont. When House of Pain collapsed soon after the tour, allowing frontman Everlast to pursue his solo career, DJ Lethal jumped ship and joined Limp Bizkit, completing the band's current lineup. They followed up the House of Pain tour by touring with the Deftones, who were one of the premier up-and-coming alternative metal bands of the time. This allowed Limp Bizkit to tour with a band that featured a similar sound, proving to their fans that they could hold their own with the popular bands of the day. By now, Limp Bizkit had successfully developed their own sound, although critics were already tagging the band with the label of Korn soundalikes. It didn't help Limp Bizkit's cause that they were already politically aligned with Korn. But by the time the band was off the road and back in Jacksonville, their legend had grown to epic proportions. Since they were still unsigned, upon their return home they were inundated by offers from record labels of all sizes, large to small, from corporate to independent. It appeared that no matter which path they chose, the kids in Limp Bizkit would be alright. After relaxing briefly from their gruelling tour, the members of Limp Bizkit began sifting through the offers from the various record labels who were anxious to help them release their first record while getting their own cut. One initial offer was for $50,000 from the small independent label Flip Records, whose owner, Jordan Schur, had been courting Limp Bizkit for months. This offer prompted even higher bids from the bigger companies, who obviously recognised the potential for Bizkit's success. Soon, an all-out bidding war broke out for Limp Bizkit's services. After much thought and discussion, the band decided to sign with the highest bidder, a subsidiary of MCA Records. Almost immediately afterwards, Durst began to feel worried, and he realised the band had made a mistake. Durst contacted Schur and asked him to help Bizkit out. Schur put together a buyout offer of around $175,000, and he signed the band to Flip's roster. Years later, he would also assume management duties for Limp Bizkit. Also, Schur negotiated a distribution deal for Flip through Interscope Records, which basically aligned Flip with a larger label that would help the indie label with marketing and promotions, as well as with shipping and pressing CDs. With Limp Bizkit months away from recording their first major label album, Durst was still unsatisfied with the direction of the band. In order to shake things up, he fired guitarist Wes Borland and replaced him with 2 new X-Men. The new lineup immediately went out on the road and began playing a series of club dates in places they'd never been before and where the name Limp Bizkit was not yet established. As a result, they often played to hostile or apathetic audiences, stealing the band's resolve to follow their dream. More often than not, Limp Bizkit would win over their audiences with sheer energy and enthusiasm. With their decibel-shattering volume, combined with Durst's wildman antics and lyrical fury, crowds of disaffected, confused kids identified with Limp Bizkit, especially because Durst himself had gone through many of the same travails of trying to fit in that the fans themselves were struggling with. Satisfied that the new lineup was coming together, in 1996, Limp Bizkit set out from Jacksonville for Los Angeles to record their first album, with Ross Robinson producing. However, Durst was still not totally confident with the new lineup, and this produced a nagging feeling that he just couldn't shake. While Bizkit was driving across Texas in a van full of equipment and band members, the driver briefly fell asleep at the wheel. The van slowly began drifting off the highway, but with the van's passengers all asleep, nobody noticed the impending disaster. The driver awoke quickly, and he attempted to correct the drifting van by jerking the steering wheel in the other direction. The van rolled over 6 times across the highway, leaving broken glass and twisted metal in its path.
We're blessed with that talent where we know if it's whack or not. You know what I mean? Some people don't know, or they think something's happening and they believe in it, and that's great. When maybe everyone else thinks like shit's whack. You know what I mean? But we have a good sense of, you know what I mean, what to do and what not to do.
Bloodied but awake, Durst crawled from the wreckage to find both of his feet throbbing with pain. Unable to stand, he would later learn that both of his feet were broken. After he escaped the smoking heap of metal, he turned around and watched his fellow band members also climb from the carnage, each dotted with blood or writhing in pain. Something inside Durst clicked, and he took the accident as a sign, karma if you will. Soon after, Durst fired the two new members and rehired original guitarist Wes Borland. The reunited Limp Bizkit headed for the studio to record their debut album. Ross Robinson had successfully established himself as a top-notch record producer that specialised in taking on bands with an aggressive, driving sound and applying a bit of polish to them. By providing bands known for their wild live sound with a touch of studio structure, Robinson had created a niche for himself and was currently in high demand. After hearing the Limp Bizkit demo tape passed on to him by Korn, Robinson felt confident that he could help the band harness their power into something palatable to a large segment of the music-buying population. Limp Bizkit also called upon DJ Lethal for the first time, allowing him to co-produce along with Robinson to ensure the presence of the hip-hop element that Durst was so fond of. Several months after retreating into the studio, Limp Bizkit emerged with their debut album, $3 Bill, Yols. Its name an inside joke to those familiar with American currency, which has no $3 bill. The record blended Durst's street savvy with the infectious, soulful grooves of drummer Otto, bassist Rivers, and guitarist Borland, who had by now coalesced into a powerful rhythm section. Behind the wall of sound created by Borland's guitars, Otto imbued his playing with a jazzy feel, going funky on his hi-hats, while still slamming out thumping bass lines, which all interweaved with a murky, busy bass from Rivers. The song that immediately gave Limp Bizkit attention was their cover of George Michael's pop hit, Faith. Michael's version was an acoustic, guitar-driven, tuneful rockabilly stomp. Limp Bizkit's version began true to Michael's rendition, with just Durst singing and Borland riffing quietly on the electric guitar. But when the song reached the first chorus, it exploded into a violent outbreak of noise, with Durst screaming Michael's lyrics about the secret to a successful relationship. While the band was confident the song could be successful, they preferred to make a name for themselves by releasing one of their own songs, at least initially. Other songs drew material from Durst's experiences growing up as an erstwhile b-boy. For instance, Counterfeit railed out against fake people who try to adjust their own appearance to find acceptance with a particular crowd, charges which were once levelled against Durst himself back in the old days. And Stalemate related Durst's frustrations at being caught in a relationship that had gone bad, something he claims to have had plenty of experience of. Also, Population lashed out at the people, perhaps including music critics, that lumped all thrash music together simply as noise pollution. Again, Limp Bizkit was growing tired of the constant comparisons to Korn. As Durst explained to sonicnet.com, they were the opposite of Korn, and more of a street hip-hop influenced band making heavy, emotional music. He thought Korn were an emotional metal band, mixing in hip-hop sounds, and the only similarity was a few guitar tones. With $3 Bill Yols ready for release, the band did what they'd always done: hit the road playing live shows all over the place. They toured for 2 straight months, dubbing the tour Ladies' Night in Cambodia and providing free admission for the first 200 women that attended each night. At one show in late 1997, Limp Bizkit shared a bill with another act with a similar sound. This band was called Stained. They left Durst with a demo tape which he liked and passed on to the executives back at Flip. They were impressed and ended up signing Stained. In the meantime, $3 Bill Yols was released to less than amazing sales. Though the band had a rabid road following, that didn't necessarily translate into huge amounts of the CD flying off store shelves. However, sales were steady if not spectacular, leading record executives to believe that if the band were able to get a hit through radio play or MTV, the record could reach platinum status, selling over 1 million copies in the United States. Yet at the same time, Limp Bizkit were having trouble breaking through to radio because of their diverse sound. With Durst's rap-like delivery, they almost qualified as a rap act. But with their crunching guitar attacks, they could just as easily qualify as a heavy metal band. Unfortunately for Limp Bizkit, most radio programmers felt they qualified as neither, and they refused to add them to their playlist for fear of offending any listeners. With sales stagnant and no chance of radio play in sight, label executives at Interscope took matters into their own hands.
I don't go on the internet very much. My parents have a computer at their house, and I'll go over there and hook it up every once in a while and go on the web, and it seems like there's always 2 or 3 new sites every time I go on. I'm just like, God, how are they doing this? I don't even have a website for our band, you know.
Radio began becoming wildly popular in America during the 1930s and 40s. As more and more American homes began buying their first radios, advertisers flocked to reach a ready audience that was willing to endure advertisements in exchange for free music or entertainment. But as television began exploding across the continent during the late 50s, radio became less and less popular. With the audience's attention span shortening, it became harder for new and unproven bands to get radio play. Plus, with more and more artists trying their hand at radio careers, airtime was more precious than ever. In the late 50s, a scandal called payola was uncovered across American radio stations, whereby record labels were secretly paying off DJs to ensure that their bands received plenty of play. In order to prevent the situation from ever happening again, the Federal Communications Commission, also referred to as the FCC, the government-run agency that regulates American radio and television, stipulated that any tracks that had been paid for had to be clearly identified as such. Learning a lesson from the sins of their past, in April of 1998, executives at Interscope paid the Portland, Oregon alternative radio station, KUFO, $5,000 to spin a song from $3 Bill Yoles. Ironically, the single was entitled Counterfeit. The song was played 50 times over a 5-week period. As mandated by FCC laws, the song was preceded and followed by an announcement that the song was being brought to the listeners courtesy of Interscope Records. Even after the 5-week sponsorship had ended, the song was still being regularly heard on the station. As a result, Counterfeit picked up steam, and it was added to the spin schedule at other alternative stations around the country. With listeners gaining interest in Limp Bizkit, $3 Bill Yoles broke into the Billboard magazine Top 100 album chart. But once news of the pay-for-play scheme broke, a backlash ensued, and the brunt of it hit Limp Bizkit square in the face. Virgin chairman Richard Branson told Time magazine that if radio didn't give people what they wanted, then the music would go to other mediums. Perhaps feeling they'd been duped, the public stopped buying $3 Bill Yoles, and the album slipped into the bottom 1/4 of the top 200. Badly needing another hit to maintain as well as drum up fan interest, Limp Bizkit had to prove that they had faith.
We could make hip-hop songs that you would think was Wu-Tang Clan. If we wanted to, you would be like, damn, shit's fat. That doesn't sound like some white guys in Limp Bizkit.
Flip Records and Interscope decided to follow up on the somewhat ignominious success of Counterfeit by pushing and promoting Limp Bizkit's cover of Faith. Durst, who was still looking to broaden his artistic horizons, managed to convince the labels to let him direct the video. Faith, with its 90s angst take on George Michael's sugary pop, immediately took off on radio, and the Durst-helmed video became a favourite on MTV's popular after-school video request programme Total Request Live. Plus, in a fortuitous stroke of luck for Limp Bizkit, creating the kind of publicity that they had not been able to buy, George Michael himself was arrested for lewd conduct whilst holed up in a stall inside a Beverly Hills public toilet. With George Michael constantly in the eye of a media storm, Limp Bizkit's version of Faith became the breakout hit of the summer of 1998. According to Durst, as he told Addicted to Noise, the success of their version of Faith had always been in the cards. He said that they knew it would be a hit, that he loved George Michael and wanted to do a fun song. Recorded a few years prior to George's media bombardment, their fans thought their version was great. The single received extensive airplay on MTV and American radio station K-Rock, East Coast and West Coast. The surrounding crazy publicity from Faith fueled sales of $3 bill rolls, shooting the record into the upper echelons of the Billboard magazine charts. In a sure sign of the group's solidifying status as a bankable band within the music industry, Limp Bizkit were asked to appear on MTV's Spring Break edition of Fashionably Loud, a show where up-and-coming bands provide a live soundtrack while models do their little turns on the catwalk. With the increased popularity around Limp Bizkit, and with teens listening to the group in larger numbers than ever before, parents began to pay closer scrutiny towards the band. One song that drew particular ire was Stuck, which stood out as a track lambasting people driven by money and/or greed. With Faith in constant rotation on MTV, Durst's face appearing regularly in the camera, and the band about to embark on a lengthy sojourn on the road, for the first time, Fred Durst was achieving the stardom he'd dreamt about his whole life.
We've also been blessed with fans who are like totally driven to get the word out, and there's something like 20 different websites now on the internet, and you know, that the kids themselves, that all our fans, you know, whether they're high school, college, elementary school, or out of school, they just have been going nuts for it and creating websites on their own.
As they became instant successes, thanks to MTV, Limp Bizkit landed 3 high-profile touring gigs in the summer of '98. Perhaps the most important for the band was their spot on the Ozfest tour that spring, which was headlined by Ozzy Osbourne and also included Tool, Megadeth and the Melvins. With many of the bands featuring heavy metal sounds, Limp Bizkit's hip-hop influences seemed even more pronounced, setting them apart from the plodding pack. And though they were invited personally by Osbourne to join the tour, they didn't accept the offer until Tool had committed, because Tool had been a long-time favourite of Durst's. In order to make a big splash during their stage entrance, and also to address the critics and parents that had branded the group a bunch of immature, potty-mouthed brats, Limp Bizkit invested in a 13-foot toilet that they burst out of each night, while the triumphant theme to Rocky blared. Later in their set, the band would also extract images of bubblegum groups such as Hanson and the Spice Girls from their toilet. Not only did their shocking manoeuvre make audiences pay attention, the band also believed that their big impression, regardless of how juvenile it was, helped them sell a few more records along the way. Besides spreading word of their blistering sound, Limp Bizkit also used the tour to enhance their image as a wild band with no regard for rules or authority. This further popularised the band in the eyes of many young teens who lived under the oppressive thumb of their parents. Kids also loved Durst's onstage antics. By now, after years of touring and countless live shows, he had developed quite a busy onstage routine, at times even jumping from the stage to roam through the audience. At one now infamous Ozfest show in Mansfield, Massachusetts, during the middle of Limp Bizkit's set, James Lynn Strait, the lead singer of a fellow Ozfest band called Snot, emerged from Limp Bizkit's 13-foot toilet, completely nude, during the middle of their set. Strait then simulated a sex act with an onstage dancer before police chased him from the stage. Before being caught by the cops, Strait briefly led them on a chase, hiding out in Ozzy Osbourne's dressing room. While Strait had to face indecent exposure charges from the local authorities, Limp Bizkit got off scot-free, but were delighted with the reams of free publicity they reaped from the incident. As soon as Ozfest ended, Limp Bizkit joined the Vans Warped Tour, a travelling caravan of punk, thrash and ska artists, which was sponsored by the worldwide skateboarding accessory company Vans. With its skateboarding and bike riding theme, the Warped Tour was a natural fit for Durst, who had grown up living and working amidst the skateboarding subculture. Limp Bizkit had received an offer from Lollapalooza, the mother of all travelling tours, started by Perry Farrell from Pornos for Pyros and Jane's Addiction. But Bizkit's mates, Korn, had already accepted a slot on the tour, and Durst and company were growing leery at frequent comparisons to Korn. In order to try and break the comparisons, they accepted the slot on the Warped Tour instead. On the Warped Tour, Limp Bizkit teamed with many bands that were largely unknown at the time, including Bad Religion, Cherry Popping Daddies, Kid Rock, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and Rancid. In retrospect, many of these bands became popular through radio and MTV while on the tour, and their increased exposure only aided Limp Bizkit's cause. After a month or so of dates with the Warped Tour, Limp Bizkit jumped ship again and this time ended up with the inaugural Family Values Tour, alongside their friends Korn. Also along for the ride, which lasted from late summer into the fall of '98, were acts like rapper Ice Cube, Rammstein and Orgy, who all played a part in a blending of hip-hop and metal. The tour took its name from the phrase "family values", which was a political platform promoted by the Republican Party in America. The Republicans frequently mentioned the phrase in their rants against bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit, who they felt were hurting America's family values by urging children to disobey their parents. The reality, of course, was that they were mainly pointing out that kids should just think for themselves. Limp Bizkit utilised the Family Values Tour to reinforce their old-school hip-hop roots, as Durst hired a troupe of breakdancers to join them on the tour, allowing them to spin and pop on stage along to the band's music. Also, he tapped into his artistic roots to design the band's stage set for the tour, making it resemble the colours and backgrounds of Tim Burton's sci-fi fantasy film Mars Attacks. All of the bands involved in Family Values bonded, and by the tour's end, many of the artists guested with each other on stage. As the tour progressed, with the bands becoming friendlier and friendlier, the shows became wilder and wilder. Rammstein, for instance, were tossed off stage at the last show of the tour on October 31st in Fairfax, Virginia, for coming on stage naked, except for some strategically placed duct tape. Limp Bizkit celebrated the tour's end by coming on stage with each member of the band dressed as Elvis Presley in different stages of his career. After the Family Values tour wrapped at the end of October 1998, Limp Bizkit went directly to Los Angeles, California, to begin working on their second studio album, a follow-up to $3 Bill Y'alls, which by now had sold over 1 million albums. Although they'd been on the road for nearly 10 consecutive months, they realised that they needed to strike while the iron was hot, recording and releasing their new album while the public still remembered them. Also, going into the studio allowed Fred Durst time to momentarily refocus his attentions on his ever-unfolding career.
We're friends with Sendog from Cypress Hill.
Right.
And he's got a side band, a rock band, and we heard him and we didn't really like what they were doing. He was changing his style a lot. Not being Sendog, and the band was playing a lot of punk rock shit.
Okay.
So we were like, we can go in and help you guys with your sound and make it accessible and catchy and fat.
After the late blooming success of $3 Bill Y'alls, which eventually sold 1.7 million copies, Limp Bizkit realised that they had a tough act to follow with their new album. If they could not replicate the high sales figures, they would be labelled one-hit wonders and probably be promptly dismissed from the music industry. But instead of going back in and working with producer Ross Robinson again, this time Limp Bizkit decided to handle the production themselves, with a little help from engineer Terry Date, who had previously assisted bands like White Zombie and Pantera. Limp Bizkit also brought in the critically acclaimed producer Brendan O'Brien, who had worked with Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam to mix the record. Though working with an established producer like Robinson would have almost certainly guaranteed success, Limp Bizkit wanted to prove to the world that they had the means to succeed inside of them. Plus, with the crossover hit Faith still garnering radio play, the band wanted to be sure to turn out a record that was full of original material. Immediately, Durst began bringing in his friends to put in guest appearances on the record, from MTV's Matt Pinfield to Korn's lead singer Jonathan Davis. Also, he tracked down Stone Temple Pilots frontman Scott Weiland to get some vocal aid. Durst told MTV Radio that Scott was more there to help them, being good at melodies and melodic senses. He said that the best singers in the world have had vocal coaches, and he'd rather work with someone that he admired and whose records he had bought. Additionally, Durst was able to fulfill a lifelong dream by doing his most hip-hop influenced track ever, End Together Now. Instead of rapping it alone though, Durst teamed with rapper Method Man from the New York-based rap collective the Wu-Tang Clan. Durst also corralled DJ Premier, one half of the hip-hop duo Gangsta, to come in and handle production to ensure that the song would have an authentic hip-hop beat to it. In between recording sessions, he worked at expanding his directing career as well as his record industry connections. Stained, the band he discovered at an early show, had released a moderately successful record through Flip, and Durst directed a video for them for a song called Just Go. He also found time to make a cameo appearance in a low-budget porno flick called Backstage Sluts 2. Limp Bizkit took a break from recording on New Year's Eve of 1998 to play at a live MTV special. They teamed with ex-House of Pain rapper Everlast and Kid Rock. They were also greeted by teen starlet Jennifer Love Hewitt, who professed her affection for the band. For Limp Bizkit, it seemed as though things couldn't go wrong.
We'd love to tour with Tool.
I like to play with Tool, even though it would be a terrible mixture of bands for the fans.
Limp Bizkit stayed out of sight for most of the first half of 1999, mainly honing and fine-tuning their next album, while taking a well-deserved break from touring. Finally, they re-emerged, announcing a tour with Caucasian rap rocker Kid Rock and Stained to start the same day Limp Bizkit's second album, called Significant Other, was released. Before Limp Bizkit resumed touring, the first single from their second album was released. Succinctly titled Nookie, the song was a raucous shout-along that told of Durst's frustrations at another previous relationship. Fans wanted their Nookie too, as the song was immediately a hit on both the alternative and active rock charts simultaneously. In the meantime, the Durst-directed video for Nookie, which featured the band playing an outdoor show while fans mobbed the group, became the most requested video on MTV. To help promote the release of Significant Other, Limp Bizkit played surprise shows in Boston, Chicago and Detroit, only announcing the shows minutes before they started in unconventional locations such as atop a Boston parking garage and on the roof of a recording studio in Chicago. Though two of the concerts were shut down quickly by local police, the Chicago show went as planned, and the band played a full set of both old and new hits to over 5,000 fans who jammed the city's streets. On June 22, 1999, Limp Bizkit released Significant Other, and it proved to be a defining work for the band. Adroitly fusing their love for hip-hop and rock music, the record lightly toned down Limp Bizkit's heavy metal elements in favour of a more mature, melodic rock. Also, the record served to finally distinguish the Limp Bizkit sound from that of Korn, ending the seemingly ceaseless comparisons. In fact, the track Nobody Like You featured Durst singing along with Stone Temple Pilots' Scott Weiland and Korn's Jonathan Davis. But Limp Bizkit refused to release the song as a single in order to stay separate from Korn. Besides Nookie, Durst also drew on his broken-hearted past for the song Rearranged, a dark and dank ballad. The album drew a favourable review from Rolling Stone magazine and others for the formerly critically reviled band. The first week that Significant Other was on release, the record sold over 634,000 copies, debuting at number 1 on the album charts and making it the 15th highest debut in history. The high numbers from Significant Other were a shock to the music industry, as the highest estimates had been around 300,000 copies. At the same time, their call to arms, Nookie, hit number 1 as well. Days after the announcement of Limp Bizkit's record-breaking assault on the charts, Durst was appointed Senior Vice President of Interscope Records. His responsibilities at the label included the signing and marketing of bands and producing, remixing and shooting videos. Durst was also given his own imprint through the label.
A lot of people don't like our shit, but those are the people we don't want listening to it anyway.
With Significant Other drawing both critical acclaim and moving many units out of stores, and the single Nookie holding strong at radio stations, Limp Bizkit began their tour with Kid Rock and Stained, calling this journey Limptropolis. They played to sold-out crowds of die-hard fans every night, finally finding an audience that was receptive and willing to hear the art of Limp Bizkit's noise, an extreme contrast to the indifferent audiences from earlier in their career. While on the road, Limp Bizkit announced plans to resurrect the Family Values Tour over the summer of 1999, this time headlining the festival on their own. And as they continued pressing forward, Significant Other also kept on keeping on, staying at number 1 on the Billboard album chart for 3 consecutive weeks, while holding off takeover attempts from the Backstreet Boys and Ricky Martin, among others. Despite being the top-selling band in America, Limp Bizkit refused to temper their live antics in any way. During a show in their hometown of Jacksonville, Durst suffered a severe ankle sprain that necessitated the cancellation of one subsequent show. And, just 1 week later, on July 12th, he got himself into a whole heap of trouble. It was at a show in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when Fred Durst's angry act on stage spilled over into an act of aggression. Just 2 weeks after being made a vice president at Interscope Records, he was arrested and taken to jail after allegedly kicking a security guard during their show. He spent about 6 hours in jail before posting a $50,000 bond. And then he headed for Chicago, which was the next stop on the Limptropolis tour. The incident apparently stemmed from a misunderstanding between one of Durst's bodyguards and a security guard hired by the venue. When the bodyguard attempted to remove a concert-goer from the stage, the venue guard thought the bodyguard was just another fan, and he tried to throw both the bodyguard and the fan out. At that point, Durst stepped in, literally. After the incident, Durst boasted from the stage, saying that he had kicked the security guard in the head. A few days later, he was officially charged with misdemeanor assault and disorderly conduct, which carried a maximum penalty of 90 days in jail and a $700 fine. Though the security guard was thought to have been relatively unharmed initially, the St. Paul, Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported that he returned to the hospital when he experienced blurred vision and equilibrium problems. While the charges were hanging over his head, Durst and Limp Bizkit wound their way to Rome, New York, where they played in the anniversary recreation of Woodstock, the weekend-long concert that began in 1969. The original concert featured everyone from Jimi Hendrix to Janis Joplin, and the theme of the show was unity and peace. Unfortunately, that theme was not repeated in 1999. Roughly 24 hours into the show, Limp Bizkit led off a hard rock triple header on Saturday night, July 24th, with nearly 200,000 fans waiting to explode. Playing before heavy metal acts Rage Against the Machine and Metallica, Limp Bizkit's set of violent, raucous rock whipped the fans into a frenzy. To begin Limp Bizkit's set, Durst took the stage and said that he had been asked to tell them to mellow out, but that he thought they should act how they wanted. Limp Bizkit then proceeded to play through several of their loud, funky songs, including Nookie and Counterfeit. Directly in front of the stage, a mosh pit developed out of fans that were slamming and smashing into each other in time to Limp Bizkit's sounds. The mosh pit erupted into violence as the band segued into the song Break Stuff from Significant Other. As Limp Bizkit tore into the song, audience members began tearing into the stage. Several people pried loose long wooden planks from a lighting tower that rose up from the middle of the crowd. They then stood atop the planks to do their own makeshift crowd surfing. As they tore into their cover of Faith, Durst himself jumped atop a plank and rode. One doctor who was volunteering as a member of Woodstock's medical staff estimated that he treated at least 12 fans for assorted injuries, from cracked ribs to spinal trauma. 14-year-old Gary Alif was trapped in the mosh pit and later needed counselling. Following Limp Bizkit's set, during the Rage Against the Machine show, the mayhem grew even more bizarre as fans set fire to the already besieged lighting tower and lit several bonfires. However, it was Limp Bizkit that drew the bulk of the publicity, as they didn't so much encourage the violence as not discourage it. Oddly enough, 1 week later, Limp Bizkit's Significant Other climbed back to number 1 on the albums chart. Following their incendiary performance, Limp Bizkit's album sold over 250,000 copies. In its first month of release, Significant Other had sold over 1.7 million copies, already outpacing the 2-year totals of $3 bill-years. To respond to the accusations that they were responsible for Woodstock's explosion of violence, Limp Bizkit chose to make fun of themselves in their next video, for Rearranged. In the video, directed yet again by Durst, each member of the band is shown locked up in a separate prison cell. From there, they're transported to a courtroom, where they watch clips of their live performance from Woodstock under the gaze of a judge, played by MTV's Matt Pinfield. The video ends with the band playing in an execution room that slowly fills with water, while a crowd of executives in suits watches the band drown. Following the release of the Rearranged video, Limp Bizkit set out on the second Family Values tour, this time accompanied by rock acts Primus and Filter, and rappers Method Man and Redman. Despite the tour lacking the punch of the previous year's headliner, Korn, the festival took in $10 million, double the previous year's total, and averaged 3,000 more people per venue than the inaugural outing. In November of 1999, after the Family Values tour, Limp Bizkit, part of their relentless course, went back on the road, this time touring with just Method Man and Redman. Also, Durst announced plans to direct a feature film in the year 2000. For all of their toils and struggles, the one constant in the Limp Bizkit story has been their faith, both in themselves and in their music. Though they haven't always been well received, or instantly accepted, through hard work and drive, Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit have made themselves big-time players in the music industry, just like they always knew they would. They just had to have a little faith.
Thank you for buying Maximum Limp Bizkit. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT3 6YY, and tell us so. We've got 3 copies of our next release for the best letters, so don't forget to include your name and address. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.